Bob. Today we're talking to Bob Stalnaker, MN 221, and he's working with interior parts right now. I'm going to ask Bob a few questions about requalification, and we'll see how his interpretation of requalification goes and where we go with that. So let's just start by saying, how did you get into automotive? What's your early experience with automotive?
Yeah, I started back in 1982. I graduated high school and I went to General Motors Institute. So at 17, I was still 17 when I started working at GM. It was 6 months work, 6 months school to get your diploma.
Wow.
So I started in 82 till 87 to get my bachelor's degree in engineering, and I worked 2.5 of those years at a GM plant in Ohio and Columbus. And I was various jobs as a co-op student, but I started that first time. I was 17 years old and I had 42 union employees, average age 56, reporting to me. I was their supervisor.
Oh man.
That was my introduction to the automotive world.
Good. Nice.
Yeah, so after I graduated, I went to work for Honda, and I worked for Honda for 7 years, from 87 to 94. And then when BMW opened up, I moved here in January 94, so I'll be here 30 years in January. So, yeah.
That's good. It's been a good career for you.
Yeah, the automotive industry is challenging. I got to see the American way, the Japanese way, and then the German way, so it's been a really interesting career to do.
Now, when you landed at BMW, can you tell us a little bit about where you started out and what other departments you worked in?
Yeah, I was in 94. I came in as, it was titled engineering coordinator then, but I was tasked with basically starting the analysis, what's now the analysis center. So I had to I probably hired 25 engineers to work in the analysis center, some good, some bad. And so I was tasked with starting that. So like the driving testing on the tablet was under me, and the analysis portion, problem analysis, was all under me. So I did that for 3 years, and a big part of that time was launching the Z3. So we had a lot of problems with the soft top. So in the analysis side, I worked on the soft top continually for those 3 years. So the opportunity came for me to move into the QMT role and take over the soft top, because the German engineer who was doing soft tops was going back. So they wanted me to take over the soft top program from a QMT side. So that was my move into the QMT realm. That was in 1997. And also my 7 years at Honda were in the QMT realm. My whole career at Honda was QMT relevant. So that's where my roots were, and then that's where I went back to in 97. So I stayed there until 2008 in the QMT role. Did the roof system, so soft tops, and then sunroofs when we did the panoramic sunroof launch within Alpha. And then I moved over to bumpers, something you're real familiar with, Marty. Plastic Omnium had all the fender modules on E70 and the crazy things we did with the plastic fenders during that launch. And then in 2008, I moved to TX5 in the cubing area, in the methods area. I was working on complex problems. So whenever we had a problem and everybody was pointing at each other, it's not my fault, they would put me in the middle of that and try to figure out what the root cause is and who's contributing and what we need to do. So I did that until 2019. So I did it for a little over 10 years. And then I went into service parts downstairs after that for 1.5 years. And we had a manager up here, Jerry Willard, who saw me sitting down there in service parts, and he told me to get back in the game, and he finally talked me back into coming back into the QMT role. So that was January of 21. So I've been here a couple, 2.5 years now. So
wow.
Yeah. This is my first time in interior parts, mainly exterior up
Right.
until 21 when I came into interior. So it's two different worlds. A lot of the same problems, but two different worlds.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been interesting.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, today we wanted to talk about requalification, and if you had to give an elevator pitch or just a real quick summary of what's requalification, how would you describe it?
Yeah, I always like to go back to the GS spec, when we talk about what is requal, what's it supposed to be. So this is GS 90018, and it gives a definition of requalification. It says requalification is the regular and planned repetition of qualification contents. This includes contents of the process series and of initial sampling, as well as the verification of reliability features and parameters, as well as requalification testing of the product and the production processes, including relevant sub-processes. So to me, that definition sounds like a German wrote it. I'm not allowed to say it, but it's really complex. And so one of the things I learned in my career was how to take complex things and try to make them simple, So requalification, we can do the same thing. We can look at that definition, and really the way we launch a product, we do a process series and an ISIR.
Mm-hmm.
We give the process an approval and we give the product an approval. So it includes all the testing, everything that has to be done for the qualification of the process and the product. We do that at the launch phase. So requalification is really requalifying that supplier is doing the exact same thing that we qualified them to do in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Is the process the same? Is the product the same? Is it meeting the same specs? Is the system the same? So that's the way I try to look at it is, hey, we've launched these products inside the supplier. Every year we have to go back and recertify, requalify that they're doing the same things that they committed to during the launch.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's the way I look at a real high explanation of what recall is.
Mm-hmm.
We're saying what we approved, that's what they're doing now. Yeah.
So sometimes, by definition, the supplier should requalify themselves, right?
Yeah.
How do we decide when we should be on site or how much activity we should take place within the requalification?
Yeah, I mean, within the spec, there's two types you can do. You can do a accompanied, unaccompanied. So accompanied is when we go through the whole checklist with them, and then we do our process and product review with them. Unaccompanied is when they do a self-assessment basically, and then submit that to us. So, I mean, for our group right now, Marty, I think we have to do accompanied. We do all the suppliers that we have in our group on a yearly basis, but it'd be based on performance basically for me. If a supplier has 0 defects for the whole year, they've supplied on time, quality, no problems that we've had with them, that might be an unaccompanied one where they can do a self-assessment. But I would say like every couple of years, you definitely would want to be there, even if you're not having problems, to see the process, make sure the systems, the testings, everything is still as we agreed to. So, yeah.
When you're doing an accompanied requalification, what would be your strategy to set up, like, who would you invite to participate, and what would be your, like, okay, we know we have to have requal this year, so it's going to be in October. How would you get ready for that?
Yeah, I mean, from our side, I would invite usually the supply chain specialist from our group, and then the LQS, the logistic quality is usually who we do. So you have logistics representation, the supply chain representation, and the quality all doing it together. So that's typically what I do. Courtesy, hey, we're going to do this on this date. Hope you can make it. They don't have to be there, obviously. It's our responsibility. So, and then from the supplier side, like to target out at least 1 month before, where we set a date. We say, okay, for this year, the requalification is going to be done here. and then it gives them time to do the checklist because they need to do the checklist before the date comes. And that way, when we go through the checklist on site, they're all prepared. They've already uploaded all their evidence for each question. We're going through the evidence live at the supplier, and then we're filling out our answers right there live during the requalification event. And that way, when you get done with the day or 2 days, whatever it takes to do, you have a fully complete requalification audit done at that point. So, but the biggest struggle that we have right now is the instability in the supplier personnel.
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it, IPQ is a complicated system. We have a new quality manager at one supplier, maybe twice a year, 3 times a year sometimes. And so the people are moving, and it makes it hard to have trained people that can know IPQ well enough to get in and do it. So we end up spending a lot of our time helping them, training them how to even fill out the requal, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, they can go off of last year's as a baseline and stuff, but still, it takes some time to train the people.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big challenge for us right now. It would work very well in a very stable environment, which we're not in right now.
Right. So as far as that, like the challenge typically is, what you're currently seeing is the personnel and not really having the training and.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, are there other things like, is there other things that we can do to maybe soften the blow or help them? What kinds of things are you doing to develop like suppliers to make sure?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm doing one tomorrow, matter of fact, and you know, for the last 2 months, we've had weekly meetings where we go into the IPQ, and he'll do 2 or 3 or 4 answers, showing him how to upload the documentation, what documentation we would expect. You know, we have an Excel list here of expectations that we're looking for for each question. So, you know, sharing that with them prepares them more even. So it's always better when they know what we're expecting anyway. We have a better audit. So anyway, yeah, helping them prepare, especially if it's somebody new in the IPQ system, it makes it go a lot smoother. I mean, when I go, I like to spend time on the documentation, but I also like to spend the majority of the time on the assembly line or on the floor. That's where you're going to see what they're really doing and whether they're doing it like they promised, you know, 5 years ago when they launched the product or whatever.
In the quality specification, it gives like very limited, like a day and a half a day for this, or you know, do you find that that's enough, or it sounds like that's probably not enough? Typically, you have to start a little earlier.
Yeah, sure. I mean, they say prep time's a half a day, and then the time for the recall's usually 2 days is what we try to do, and then wrap up is another half a day. So when they put it all together, it's like 3 days, but that would be with an experienced supplier, you know, where you just set a date and say, we're going to do it. But for our suppliers, especially in America, it takes more effort because of the instability, I think.
Yeah.
So, and it's based on the supplier. I mean, some suppliers, some bigger suppliers, like Drexelmeyer, they have a person who does nothing but all their audits, the IATF audit, the CQC audit, our requalification audit. So, and it's been a stable person for a long time. So that's a different situation than when you're getting 3 quality managers in a place in a year, you know?
Yeah.
So it depends on the supplier a lot also.
Our requalification has a very specific set of guidelines, right? So it walks you through every process step, basically, of how the organization works together. How would you prioritize those things? There are certain areas that you might spend more time on, and does it vary by supplier?
Yeah, I think it varies by supplier, and it's based on performance. A lot of it's based on performance. You know, you might have one supplier who's struggling with maintaining their equipment, you know, and you're always having downtime, and you know, logistics is always running low on parts or whatever, and maintenance might be a huge focus for that supplier. And do we have the right spare parts, and do they have the right maintenance people and the right staff there? So one supplier might be that. Another one might be the production process. We're getting these random defects, all throughout the year. And we need to focus on the process, the consistency and the capability of the process. So you might spend a lot more time on the production process side of it rather than maintenance. So I think it's based on performance, how the supplier's done in the last year, and it kind of gives you a direction where to focus.
Yeah, that's good.
I mean, we deal with our suppliers every day, so we know most of the time where they're weak and where we need to focus, because we've dealt with them for the whole year, so.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Coming to the day of the live audit where you come on site, are there some particular things that you look for that would tell you kind of, okay, it's looking like we're going to be okay, or it's looking like, hey, I'm not so sure?
I mean, the first thing I look for is their involvement and buy-in for the whole requal process from their management. Their plant manager should be engaged, at least initially, to say, hey, we're here and we're doing all this to succeed. We want to succeed, and you ought to see the leadership involved, and that's one good sign.
Mm-hmm.
If you go there and they say, what are you doing here? That's a big problem.
Yeah.
So anyway, to have the management buy-in for what we're trying to do here, and understanding what we're trying to do with recall is an important part of it.
Yeah.
We have to explain that to our supplier, why we're even doing this,
Mm-hmm.
or they're just going to see it as another audit, So to understand the basis of why we're doing a recall is really critical to get their buy-in, I think. So, I mean, for me, after that, then when you're on the shop floor, there's huge clues, whether a company's really bought into supplying a quality product or not. The visual management and the leadership's evident on the floor. So, if the place is a total disaster, there's no visual management going on, they don't know what their OE is, all these things show you that the leadership's lacking there. So to me, it becomes evident real quick if a supplier is really doing what they should.
So it sounds like the management and the management style and culture are the biggest factors.
Yeah.
In the health.
I mean, I've dealt with suppliers, like I said, for 30, 40 years. The leadership's the key, the management. They drive the culture, they drive what happens on the shop floor. And if that leadership's not there, everything else goes awry usually. So when you have a supplier that's struggling badly, mightily, leadership usually needs to change because it's not being led well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so it's a challenge because good leadership's hard to find also.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
leadership's the key from my standpoint. And I've seen bad suppliers turn very good with leadership change.
That's interesting. Yeah, the same plant, same
everything.
more or less the same personnel, but leadership can make the big difference. I think you mentioned it before, but I was going to ask you about like how much current performance goes into your focus and what you're looking for. And I think the best place to get that feedback is probably MN6, right? From our front desk folks. And can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can. What I told you, I'm doing one tomorrow. So, right here I have their yearly performance indicators, KPIs. So I've got PPM, RMU, everything out of the LPKM system. So our overall supplier rating, our overall quality rating out of LPKM, and then how many incidents they've had and how many sorts they've had for the year. So I send this ahead of time to them. They know what we're going to talk about when it comes to KPIs. This is their performance. In my case, I talk to the MN6 counterparts at least weekly. So we're always going back and forth with RMU and with defects and issues they're having. So, yeah, I'm really up to speed with what MN6 is finding. I do a summary of the rework minutes every week also for each supplier that I'm responsible for. So I know every defect, even if it was only a 1 minute rework, I know what it is. The supplier knows what it is. So as far as the KPIs, it's really crystal clear to them how they've performed for the last year. This one tomorrow is going to be a little bit painful because their performance hasn't been what we needed. So anyway, it's going to be one of the topics we talk about tomorrow. Yeah.
And then when you're with the supplier, you're giving feedback. It's a live audit at the time. You're going through each of the sections, which include the maintenance and all those, as you mentioned. What in your experience, how do suppliers take the feedback, and how many or do you see many of them taking it seriously and really going back in and making substantive changes, or what's your experience with that?
I mean, I've done different types of recalls over the years, and for us as the auditor at this point in a recall, for me, it's critical that we keep the points to a priority. If we start getting nitpicky about every little thing, the supplier will see that, and then they'll kind of disregard us as just being nitpicky. But if they have a process with a control plan and they're not doing this check and they're not doing that, that's the process they signed up to. That's where we need to focus, you know. A good, capable process under control will deliver us a good product, you know. So I try to focus on the main things. Is the process what we agreed to, and is the product what we agreed to? And then I focus there to make sure we're requalifying what's critical, you know. So
have you found some of your struggling suppliers, what kinds of things do they really struggle with? Like, is it you know, their poka-yoks, or is it maintenance issues, or what? If the supplier is really struggling, what are some of the Achilles heel, the things that really tend to hold them back?
I mean, the suppliers I'm working with right now, maintenance is a huge topic. One, getting qualified maintenance personnel and keeping them, obviously, covering all 3 shifts. You know, with our volume here, Marty, it's really a stress right now on all the suppliers. And you think about, with the economy the way it is and this post-COVID world we're living in, you know, Buc-ee's is paying $25 an hour and our suppliers are paying, you know, $15, $16 an hour. It's a competition for talent, and the automotive industry is behind in the payment of the talent. So for me, the people is the biggest struggle that the suppliers have, whether it be in the quality realm, maintenance realm, production realm, it doesn't matter. Getting the talent and trying to keep the talent is the biggest struggle. And I really don't know how that changes here in the upcoming future, but with our volumes here, it's such a stress on all of our suppliers. They have to have the best people.
What advice would you give to a quality manager, to the management team at your supplier, as far as preparing for requalification, but also as far as what's the best way to make sure that you're ready?
Yeah. Well, what I like to do after we do the checklist, I like to take the second day or the second half of the first day, however it works out, on the floor. And I like to take one part out of each commodity. Like the supplier I'm doing tomorrow has 4 commodities. So we're going to take 4 different parts. We're going to have the control plan and the work instructions. We're going to go step by step through the process, making sure everything on the control plan is being done, everything in the work instructions matches what that person's doing. So it's a simple process audit, but it gives you a great picture of, are they doing what they said they were going to do? on the documentation that they committed to during the ISIR, you know. And we'll do that on all 4 of those commodities, and then that'll give me a great snapshot to say this company's doing what they said they were going to do 3 years ago or 5 years ago when we launched. They're making the same product that they committed to. That's why we're having a good result, hopefully, you know. That's the idea behind it. So I really like to take the whole process and follow it through, and that way we're really re-qualifying the process and the product at that point by looking at the whole thing.
So as far as a QMT, if they've never done a requalification, or if they're, you know, still in kind of a learning phase,
Yeah.
what kinds of tips or what advice would you give to them?
Yeah, I mean, one is know your parts, because I learned this way early on when I was at Honda. Even as a QMT, you have to know your parts, and you have to know what's critical in the process to make that part. So even when you're doing a requalification, you have to know what processes are critical.
Yeah.
So knowing your parts is really one of the first things we should do as a QMT. You should be the local expert on your part, technically, process-wise, product-wise. Everything should be in your head for that product. I mean, you're the expert here inside BMW for that product. So 1 is know your parts. 2 is know the process. So if you know there's supposed to be these certain checks in the process and they're not doing them, it's a big problem, you know. Could cause a failure in the field or whatever. So know your parts and know your process, and it'll go a long way to be a good QMT, I think. So
that's perfect. Yeah, it's really good advice. If you had to leave a legacy for the QMT department, I know you've been in a lot of different departments, but for this department, for passing on to the less experienced QMTs that are coming up and, you know, really digging into their processes, what kind of legacy would you want to leave?
I mean, I don't know whether it's a legacy or not, but I started my career in the QMT world, and I always told my manager in TX5 I wanted to end my career in the QMT world, which it's not the most popular job right now. It's a very difficult job with working with everything we have to work with right now. But the reason that I said that and the reason I did it is because it's one of the most amazing jobs, because you can learn so much in this job. You can learn processes, materials, anything you want to learn, machinery, equipment, maintenance, whatever. You have to know a lot about a lot of things. So the job's challenging, but it's fascinating. And so the legacy would be the excitement of that job, that this is really a job that's amazing because I can learn so much, you know. And you can see it through my career path. I really haven't moved up. It's been more of a plateau, but part of that was enjoying what I did, you know. And even coming back into this crazy post-COVID QMT world that we're in, I've really enjoyed what I've done the last 3 years. It's been hard. My wife's called me crazy several times, but it's an exciting job. It's fascinating, really. Very challenging, but very fascinating. So if people can get that kind of passion for the job, that would be a great legacy to leave.
That's great. Thank you, Bob.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. As always, good. It's a good interview, and I think requalification is one of the critical, really critical processes, because it recaps yearly what we do on the development side. And so thank you. That's some good advice. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. All right. Okay, or